Well, hello everyone. I thought I would talk to you a little bit about telescopes. Over the years, I get a lot of people sending me messages on Facebook or emails to my website asking what is the best kind of telescope I can buy, or what would be the best kind of telescope for a beginning observer. Well, I thought I would go through the basic three types of telescopes now that I've got time. There are three kinds of basic telescope designs: a refracting telescope, a reflecting telescope, and a compound telescope. There are other variations on these, but these are the three basic types. A refracting telescope is made primarily of lenses. It's a classic kind of telescope you think of when you look at cartoons and movies. A refractor tends to be a long cylindrical tube with an eyepiece at one end. A reflecting telescope is exactly as the name suggests. It's a different design. It's designed by Isaac Newton. It reflects starlight into the eyepiece for the observer. So reflecting telescopes tend to have a slightly larger lens at the back, mirror at the back. Reflectors are mirrors, refractors are lenses. So reflecting telescope, the light comes in down the tube, hits the mirror, gets redirected back up into the diagonal, and then through the eyepiece. So very often in these designs you'll see these slightly larger tubes, and the eyepiece is actually at the side. Instead of the back of the telescope, the eyepiece will be projecting out the side here, so you're looking into the side of the tube. So that's a characteristic appearance of a reflecting telescope. The other type of design is a compound telescope. And a compound telescope is a combination of a refractor and a reflector. By that I mean it's made from a combination of mirrors and lenses. This telescope I have at the moment, my old faithful Meade LX10 8-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain. Schmidt-Cassegrain is a type of compound telescope. It has corrector plates, it has lenses, and has mirrors. And what it does is it folds the focal length. The focal length is the length of the telescope optical system. It's the length of from the moment starlight reflects off the mirror or lens and enters the eyepiece. So a long focal length telescope tends to be bigger, they're more expensive, but they're better designed for observing high resolution planetary detail. If you're looking to do high magnification work, you want a long focal length instrument, a long focal length refractor, or at very least an F10 optical system of this here type. With a long focal length instrument you can observe high resolution detail on nights of good seeing, on the planets, on the moon, and for separating close double stars and various things like that. If on the other hand you are a deep sky observer, you want to observe comets, you want to observe rich star fields, you want to observe nebulae and galaxies, wide fields of view, then a rich field telescope is better for you. That means a telescope with a shorter focal length, so the tube tends to be shorter and the field of view is wider. So those are your three main types: refractors, reflectors, and compound. So what do I recommend for a beginner? The problem is that a lot of refracting telescopes tend to be poor quality. The standard size of refracting telescope lens on the market today in any shop is around 2 inches or more. To be honest with you, the light gathering ability of a 2-inch aperture instrument is very, very small. It's not good enough. You'd be better off with a good pair of binoculars such as 10x50s. Refracting telescopes, in order to get a decent refracting telescope, you really need to be looking at something in at least the 4-inch aperture range, and those tend to be quite expensive. So unless you're really into the hobby and you want to invest a lot of money, I would stay away from those cheap, small refracting telescopes. Instead, I would highly recommend a reflecting telescope, the Isaac Newton design. Reflectors are cheaper per inch of aperture. By that I mean is, you could, instead of having a 2-inch refractor, which is utterly useless, you could have instead, at the very basic level, a 4.5-inch aperture reflector. So the reflecting telescope has a mirror 4.5 inches in diameter. That's the very basic level, I would say, the very least use you could get out of any telescope size, at least 4.5-inch mirror diameter. Those telescopes are relatively cheap. They're cheaper than the refractor of the same size, and you're collecting a lot more light, and they just benefit you all around. And because of their design, their focal length, anywhere within the F8 sort of F7 range, still good enough for observing deep sky objects, bright deep sky objects. You still have a relatively modest field of view, is wide enough to enjoy these galaxies and still having enough light gathering ability to see some detail on planets like Saturn and the Moon and Jupiter. So you have the best of both worlds. With the compound telescope, it's similar. You can do both as well, but these telescopes tend to be much more expensive because you need to have a tracking system. You need driving mounts. They're designed more for astrophotography. I would go down this kind of telescope, Schmidt-Cassegrain and his cousin, the Maxotive-Cassegrain telescope types. So if you're starting out and money is an option, I would highly recommend going for a good pair of 10 by 50mm binoculars. By that I mean the magnification, the power of the binoculars is 10, and the aperture, the lens in front of the binoculars, that lens is 50mm in diameter. That collects a fair amount of light, and you have enough magnification for details. That's a good instrument for observing star clusters and bright nebulae, and getting to know finer areas within the constellations, and just general observing. They're handy, they're easy to pick up, they're cheaper. You can pick some of them up. Even in Lidl's nowadays do occasional deals on them within the £20–30 range, which is brilliant. So I would recommend a 10 by 50 binoculars and a planisphere, or a good book on astronomy which shows you star charts, and get a torch with a red LED on the end of it, or wrap something around it to make it red, and learn your way around the stars, learn the constellations, and use your binoculars to find your way around the sky. If you find that enjoyable and there's something you want to stick with, then I would recommend saving up and investing in a reflecting telescope. At the very least 4.5-inch aperture, but preferably, if you can afford it, a 6-inch aperture. A reflecting telescope with a 6-inch aperture mirror is going to see a lot of details, going to see a vast range of deep sky objects, and works reasonably well on the moon and planets as well. The money is good, the portability is good, and they're light. Then we come into the next issue, mounts. Telescopes come on two different mounts, alt-azimuth and equatorial. An alt-azimuth mount is a simple mount. It's a bit like a tripod head, where you have movement and azimuth, side to side across the horizon, and you have movement and altitude, called, in the astronomical language, that's called declination. So you have the simple up and down, left and right mount. For visual observing only, I would highly recommend an alt-azimuth mount. You don't need anything complicated. A lot of reflecting telescopes come in equatorial mounts nowadays, and they have this complicated look, all different angles to the mount, and beginning observers get totally intimidated by this and end up losing their interest in astronomy because of it. Equatorial mounts are very specifically designed. They have to be orientated the correct direction, clamped off and tightened, and they have to be polar aligned. So the polar axis of your mount has to look at Polaris, the North Star. That way you can track objects across the sky. Whenever everything is set up and lined up, usually people look through the eyepiece, and you'll use a knob. There should be two knobs with it, right ascension and declination. They usually come in the form of a handle with a knob at the end. If you're observing, say, planet Jupiter, by simply turning the right ascension handle to the right, you can make the telescope track the planet across the sky. And manually, so that way you don't have to keep repositioning the telescope, which is very useful. So if you're into prolonged visual observing and doing sketches or painting what you're seeing, then an equatorial mount is a way to go with these slow motion controls. But if you just want to visually observe and move the telescope around, find objects in the sky with complete freedom and ease, which I like to do, then a simple alt-azimuth mount is the way to go. Also, I should say, there's different variations on these things. Refracting telescopes are not all long 2-inch aperture useless pieces of rubbish. Proper refractors are superb optical systems. 4-inch aperture or above. You can also get rich field refractors nowadays with the refracting telescopes in a short tube, so you end up getting these superb extra low dispersion glass with multiple triplet lenses inside them to correct any colour fringing, and the focal length is shortened, so you get these wide fields of view in your refracting telescope. Those are Stephen James O'Meara is famous for using those for his book on the Messier objects. The amount of detail he can see in the Messier objects with a 4-inch short field refractor is incredible. So that's another thing to think about. Stick to alt-azimuth mounts, stick to a reflector, If you can get a reflector on an alpha-azimuth mount, even better. Best example of one of those is a Dobsonian mount. Dobsonian telescopes consist of a rocker box with a large tube with the reflector and telescope sits in the rocker box, and you simply turn the rocker box left or right and the telescope up and down by your hand. Sometimes they come with handles. Very, very simple. My 16-inch Dobsonian years ago was that same design. They're so elegant and simple to use. Nothing gets in the way, and you can become one with the sky. It's like it's like looking down a rifle. Everything is just in tune with you, an extension of your arm. So yes, a reflecting telescope on a Dobsonian mount, in my personal opinion, is the best way to go for any beginning or budding astronomer. If you get into it and years later you want to get into astrophotography, I would recommend something along the lines of a reflecting telescope mounted on a tracking mount, or simply going for these Schmidt-Cassegrain designs. You can get smaller ones, and this is an 8-inch, but you can get Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes in the, I think you can get them in the 6-inch range now in some places, but 8-inch is a good place to start from. These have motor drives in them which track the telescope across the sky. The modern instruments have go-to technology put into the GPS. The telescope knows where it is. It will actually align itself with the stars, and all you have to do is pick up a hand paddle, type in the object you want to see, such as M31, and it'll slew across the sky whatever rate you've set it to, and it will find M31 for you, and it should be in the center of the field of view. Amazing technology. A lot of the modern telescopes are like that now. But I would recommend, if you're just starting out in astronomy, do not be tempted to get a small telescope that's computer driven with a go-to system that finds objects for you. Even though it sounds really fancy technology and irresistible, it's a poor way of learning the sky. Do not rely on technology to learn the stars. It's a bit like travelling. Everybody uses GPS now, but back in the day everyone used maps. Think of how much you learn from looking at a map, learning your way across the countryside or across the landscape, finding roads and locations. We're looking at that printed map. We're visual people. Astronomers and photographers are visual people. Once you look at the map, it's ingrained in your mind and you will never forget it. It's the same with the stars. If you're learning your way among the stars, star hopping from star to star, or using a star chart, star map, you'll never forget it. It stays with you. You'll eventually build up a encyclopedic knowledge of the sky. The stars will become your friends, and you'll be able to go anywhere in the world, look up and find any object in the sky simply by guiding your telescope to it without any help or any assistance from any technology. So I would recommend that. Keep it simple, keep it passionate, and keep as large an aperture as you can at a reasonable price. When they don't know anything about telescopes, they want to know how much power does your telescope have, or what's the magnification on it. I want to be able to see 600 times the moon up close and so forth. This is not important. Any telescope company or telescope in a shop which advertises its telescope using power as a selling point is probably selling you a very bad telescope. I would ignore it completely. Telescopes aren't about power. Telescopes are about light collecting ability. First of all, high power is useless if you have an unsteady atmosphere. Astronomers call the steadiness of the atmosphere seeing. On a night of good seeing, the atmosphere is nice and stable. When that happens, the planets stop winking, and during moments of good seeing you can see high resolution detail on that planet. But many nights throughout the year, with the jet stream overhead, we have thermals rising up meeting the cool air. The atmosphere, especially in the evening time after sunset, the atmosphere tends to be unstable or turbulent. This is called scintillation, and you can see it when the stars are twinkling. On a night of bad seeing, you get that twinkling. That's the worst kind of night for planetary and lunar observing. If you have the best telescope in the world, 600, 800 magnification, whatever it is you have, and you point it at that planet on a night of bad seeing, you're not going to see anything. The planet will look like a blur, a soft blur with no detail. So in order to get high resolution views of these objects, you need good seeing conditions, which means being out on nights, observing as regular as possible to find those nights. Sometimes they happen by accident. Good seeing conditions are fleeting. They pop in for a few minutes, then they disappear, and then they come back again, so you need to spend time. Also nights when the telescope is dripping with dew, those can be quite beneficial for good seeing, stable conditions as well. But for general telescopic work, you want a night of good seeing and you want light collecting ability. The larger the aperture of your mirror or lenses on the telescope, the more starlight it's going to collect. That's resolution. Power has nothing to do with it. Resolution is everything. So you want aperture and price and stability of your mount and tripod. Also, I should mention eyepieces when I'm here as well. You're talking about magnification when you're starting out. Remember, the eyepiece that comes with your telescope, you might have 2 or 3 that come with the telescope with different focal lengths. The focal length will be wrote on the side of it in millimeters. It's important that when you're starting out, you use the longest focal length, excuse me, longest focal length eyepiece in your set. This is the one with the lowest power and the widest field of view. This is the eyepiece you will use more often than anything else. My telescope here came with a standard Meade Super Colossal 26mm eyepiece. That's the lowest power in the set. That's the eyepiece I would use for finding my way around the sky, for hunting objects, for looking at nebulae, clusters, comets, even for tracking down the planets. That does me 99% of the time. But if I want to go a bit further, I can take it to the next level. Your telescope might come with one of these. This is a Barlow lens. Barlow lenses come on 2 Barlow or 3 Barlow. This is a 2 Barlow. What that means is it magnifies the power of a given eyepiece, or the focal length, by 2. So you slot in your eyepiece, tighten it up. My 2 Barlow is now magnify the power of this eyepiece by 2. So this 26mm eyepiece is now 52mm, 52mm eyepiece. A 26mm is converted to 52mm from this here. So you get more power that way. As for your other eyepieces, your high magnification eyepieces, when you get that night of good seeing and good steady skies, and you want to find the polar caps on Mars, you want to see the belts on planet Jupiter, maybe even the Great Red Spot, or some of the festoons, or some of the Galilean satellites are casting their dark circular shadows onto the surface of the planet, or you want a good look at Saturn's rings with the Cassini division, or even inside the lunar craters, looking at the floors and the rills, then you want to use a higher power eyepiece. And your higher power, in this case, this is a 6.4mm. This is the highest power eyepiece that came on my telescope years ago, 20 years ago. That would be my highest power eyepiece. Only in nights of good seeing can I use that eyepiece, and primarily it will be used for planets and the moon. You can also combine your high power eyepiece with the 2 Barlow and make it even more powerful. But keep in mind, the more power you use, the smaller the field of view of the eyepiece, and the quicker the object's going to move through the telescopic fields. You have to keep tracking it, and that's when your motor drive comes in. But that's how you change the power of your telescope. You rely on your aperture for light collecting ability, and you use your eyepieces to adjust the magnification, and you assist that with a 2 Barlow lens if you have one. So I hope you find that interesting. If anybody has any questions, drop me a line. I should say, when I'm here, I took this off the tripod. This is the main telescope and mount. This is an alt-azimuth mount. The alt-azimuth mount, that means it moves in azimuth now, like this. And it also moves in altitude here. But these telescopes now come mounted on a wedge, an equatorial wedge, which is the same as an equatorial mount. An equatorial wedge helps these kind of telescopes to track objects in the sky for long periods of time for astrophotography or CCD work. I should mention too, make sure you have a good finder scope on your telescope. My old finder scope slotted in here, but I've lost it years ago, so I now just sight along the tube and find my way along the sky, which is quite time consuming. But if you have a finder scope, and all good telescopes should, make sure you line it up with the main instrument first when you get it. The best way to do that is to find an object during daytime, like a distant telegraph pole. Look for your low power eyepiece, focus in on it, center it in the field of view, and then position your finder scope using the 3 adjustment knobs on the bracket until the finder crosshairs, like a rifle scope, are pointing directly at that aerial or distant object. That way, when you go out under the stars that night, all you have to do is point the hairs on the finder scope to a star or object of your choice, and that object should be within the field of view of your low power eyepiece. So it's very well worth doing. So I hope you find that of interest. Thank you.